There is a card in this story that never changed, and I keep coming back to it. It is an arrival card, the plain kind, a royal household prince for a controlled visit, and across the top of this one runs a thin red stripe that means one thing only: no household access. During the same week, that card sat stamped and ready on a desk in London. A warm line went out to the press saying the family door was open again, that a father and a son were finally finding their way back to each other. 2 pieces of paper, 1 week, and only one of them decided who could actually walk into a room. I want to walk you through the distance between those 2 pieces of paper, because the distance is the whole story. On one side, you have a sentence, generous and soft, built to travel across every front page and every morning show. On the other, you have a card with a red stripe and a guest list, and a second guest list that does not match the first. By the end, I think you will see that nobody in this story lied about whether Charles wanted to see Harry. The fight was never about the wanting, it was about what the wanting was allowed to be called. Let me put the 2 versions side by side before we go any further. The public version, the one you would have read this summer, is simple and moving. The king hopes to reconcile, the door is open, the family is healing. The quieter version, the one that lived on that desk, is narrower and colder. 1 meeting, 1 neutral room, an escort at the entrance, and a card that keeps every private household space closed. Both of those can be true at once, and that is exactly the trick of it. The warm sentence was not false. It was just doing a job the paperwork never agreed to. And before we go on, hold on to one detail I am deliberately not explaining yet. There were 2 guest lists for this visit, not 1. Same day, same son, same father. Keep that second list in the back of your mind, because when it finally comes out from under the lamp, it changes everything you thought the warm sentence meant. So who benefits from that warm sentence staying believed? That is where this becomes a story about 2 people who never appear on camera. Call the first one the briefing coordinator. Her work is the reconciliation narrative itself. When the family healing story is believed, she is the person who shaped it, the one whose reading of the mood turned out to be right, the one the desks come back to next time. Her standing rises with the warmth of the language. If the reunion is full and real, she authored the moment. If it is only a bounded meeting in a controlled room, she authored very little, and the desks will notice. Now call the second one the household access secretary. Her work is the opposite. She does not shape moods. She stamps cards. She keeps the guest list. She knows which rooms are cleared and which stay locked. She knows which escort walks which corridor. Nothing about her job rewards a warm sentence. Everything about her job rewards a card that says exactly what was agreed and nothing more. When those 2 women looked at the same visit, they were never going to describe it the same way, because one of them is paid to make it feel large and the other is paid to make it stay small. Here is the moment the 2 versions first touched. The coordinator sent her line out early, before the households had settled anything past that single meeting. In her account, the reconciliation was already in motion, the father reaching for the son, the old wound closing at last. It landed the way she wanted. Within a day, the softer papers were writing about a family coming home. And while that language spread, on the access secretary's desk, the arrival card was being prepared for what had actually been authorized, which was 1 visit, 1 neutral room, and a red stripe that kept every household door shut. Picture that desk for a second, because this is where the story really lives. It is late, the corridor outside is dark and quiet, and there are 2 sheets of paper under a single lamp. The first guest list is the warm one, the coordinator's version, and Harry's name sits on it beside shared rooms, family spaces, the kind of access that would make the healing story true. The second guest list is the household's own, and it is the same visit, the same day, except every shared room has a line drawn through it in plain ink. 1 neutral room survives. Beside both of them is the arrival card with its red stripe, and the secretary is holding it the way you hold a thing you already know you will have to defend. That card is the anchor of everything that follows, so I want you to keep it in your mind, not the sentence, the card, because the sentence can be softened, reframed, walked back, blurred into feeling. The card cannot. It says no household access, and it was stamped before the warm line ever reached a front page. If this breakdown is useful, the like button helps this channel keep reaching people who want the fuller picture. Now stay with me, because what happened next is where this gets genuinely revealing. The first real clash came when the 2 lists reached the same office and refused to agree. The coordinator needed the warm list to be the true one, because her sentence was built on it. The secretary needed the household list to be the true one, because her stamp was built on it. And the thing that decided between them was not a feeling about Charles, it was a room. Either Harry was cleared into the shared household spaces, or he was cleared into one neutral room with an escort at the door. There is no soft middle on an arrival card. There is a stripe or there is no stripe. The coordinator moved first to protect her version. When the narrower reality started to show, she did what a person in her seat does. She reached back to the most unarguable fact she had, which was that the king genuinely wanted the contact. That part was true, and she leaned on it hard. If the father wants his son back, she seemed to say, then surely the door is open, and surely the warm sentence is just an honest reading of an open door. It is a clever move because it hides a swap inside it. Wanting contact and granting household access are not the same thing, and she needed you not to notice the join between them. The secretary answered the only way her job allows. She did not argue about feelings. She reached for the second guest list, the household version, the one with every shared room crossed out, and she set it beside the warm one. Two lists, same visit, and the difference between them was not affection, it was rooms. That is the moment the story stops being about whether a father loves his son and becomes about who gets to decide what that love is permitted to unlock. And I want to reframe the whole thing here through something colder than feeling, because both things can be true at once. Yes, this is a story about a father and a son, but it is also a story about access, and access is a currency. Being the person who shapes the reconciliation narrative is worth something real. It is standing, it is future briefings, it is the quiet power of being the household's chosen reader of the family mood, and being on the household distribution list, the internal channel where the real language is agreed before it ever reaches a front page. That is worth something too. It is proximity. It is the ability to shape the sentence at the source. When you see that both of those carry a price, you understand why a person would fight this hard over a single word. Now I have to bring in the person almost everyone assumed was the villain, because this is where the assumption breaks. When the reports first paired the king's hope for reconciliation with a firm line held elsewhere in the family, the easy reading was that the queen was blocking her husband, keeping the son out, drawing a cold boundary through a warm moment. That is the story that writes itself. I understand why. It fits an old picture that people have carried for years. But watch what the paperwork actually shows, because it points somewhere quieter and more interesting than a wicked stepmother headline. Camilla did not cancel a meeting. The meeting survived. The neutral room card is proof that the contact was real and that nobody locked the son out of the building entirely. What she resisted was not the visit. It was the sentence. She would not let one bounded, escorted, single-room meeting be dressed up and sold to the public as a restored household, because a restored household means keys and corridors and a place at the private table, and none of that had been agreed by anyone. The line she drew was not through Harry, it was through the briefing. And you can hear that line being drawn in the way the two of them actually spoke. Here is the reconstructed exchange that sits at the center of it, the phone call between the two of them, the way I read it from where the paperwork ends up. The coordinator opens with the word she needs: reunion. She uses it the way you use a word you want to become fact, simply by being said aloud. The secretary answers with a different word: room. The coordinator says the family is coming back together. The secretary says one room, one escort, one card. The coordinator says the king wants his son home. The secretary says then clear the household spaces and I will change the stripe. And there is a silence on that line, a real one, because the coordinator cannot clear the household spaces. She does not have the keys, she only has the sentence. Reunion offered 4 times, one room returned 4 times, and a card that would not move an inch. That call is the hinge. Everything before it is a disagreement about tone. Everything after it is a fight about a document. And documents are where this channel always finds the honest record. Because once the secretary had said clear the rooms or keep the stripe, the coordinator was trapped. She could not produce a cleared household. So she did the next thing, which was to try to make the warm version louder than the card. She leaned harder into the leaked guest list, the generous one, the one with Harry beside the shared spaces. And for a short while it worked. The healing story got warmer, the reunion got fuller in the telling, and the card sat on the desk, unchanged, waiting. This is the midpoint, and it is the whole reversal in one sentence, so let me name it plainly. The card proved the meeting was real, which means the false part was never the contact. The false part was the claim that contact had restored the household. Once you see that, the entire story flips under you. The secretary was not exposing a lie about whether Charles and Harry would meet. They would. She was exposing a lie about what the meeting was worth, about whether one escorted hour in a neutral room could honestly be sold as a family coming home. Let me take you into a second room, because there is another private scene here, and it is the quieter of the two. Early morning, a communications office somewhere across the city from that household desk. The warm sentence has already gone out. The coordinator is at her screen refreshing a front page, watching her own language come back to her in someone else's byline, and for an hour, it feels like a win. Then a message arrives that she was not copied into, and she realizes the real version of the visit is being agreed on a distribution list she can no longer see. She is reading the household's decisions the way you read weather, after the fact, from outside. The sentence was hers. The rooms were never going to be. People who work that corridor will tell you the distribution list is where the real family lives. Not the front pages, not the warm sentences, but the quiet internal thread where a handful of names agree what a visit will be before the public is told anything at all. An aide who has sat near that thread for years, put it simply. The list decides, everyone else describes. And the coordinator had spent the week describing a visit that the list had already decided would be small. That is the gap the secretary kept pointing at, over and over, and it is the gap the warm sentence was built to hide. The moment you can see the list, the sentence stops sounding like healing and starts sounding like marketing. The escalation ended the way document fights usually end. The secretary stopped answering tone with tone and produced both drafts together, the warm list and the household list, side by side, same visit, and asked a single question that had only one answer. Which rooms were actually authorized? Not which rooms would be nice, not which rooms the mood suggested, which rooms were cleared on the card, and there is no version of that question the warm sentence survives because the card says one neutral room. And the warm sentence had promised a house. There was no shouting in that, by the way. That is not how these things end. It ends with two sheets of paper turned to face the same direction on a desk, a question asked in a level voice, and a long pause while everyone understands that the pause is the answer. The warm list could not clear a room. The household list already had. And once both were lying there in the same light, the coordinator was no longer defending a reading of the family mood. She was defending a promise the paperwork underneath her simply did not make. So the sentence came down. The full reunion line, the generous one, the one that had travelled across every front page, was withdrawn, not softened. Withdrawn. The claim that the household had reopened to Harry was pulled back to what the card had said all along, which was one bounded meeting in one neutral room with an escort at the door. The warmth did not vanish. The contact stayed real. But the specific promise, the family is whole again promise, was taken off the table because there was never a document sitting under it. And the person who had built that promise paid for it. This is the part the softer coverage will never show you, and it is the part that matters most. The coordinator lost her place on the household distribution list. The internal channel she had used to push the warm version, the one that had let her shape the language before anyone outside could check it, was closed to her. That is not a small thing in that world. It is the difference between being the person who writes the sentence and being the person who reads it in the paper like everyone else. She had tried to make a bounded meeting sound like a homecoming, and the price was the very access that had let her try. The hardest public reading of it came from outside the household. Royal biographer Tom Bower put the verdict in a single line on the record, the kind of line a viewer could paste straight into a comment. A reconciliation you have to walk back within the week, he said, was never a reconciliation. It was a press release wearing a family's face. You do not have to agree with every word of that to feel where it lands. The warm sentence had asked the public to believe in a healing it could not document, and the moment the document was produced, the healing shrank back to its true size. And if it sounds familiar, that is because we have watched this shape before. A warm signal goes out first, generous and unmeasured, and the practical terms arrive quietly afterward, once the feeling has already set. It happened with the language around earlier visits, where a single controlled contact was framed as a broader thaw, and the conditions only surfaced later in the small print of who could stay where. The pattern trains you. If you have followed this family long enough, you stop reacting to the temperature of the announcement and you start waiting for the card. The people inside the household have learned the same lesson from the other direction, which is why the secretary reached for paper instead of arguing about mood. Let me pay off the loop I opened at the start, the second guest list I told you to keep in mind. That colder list, the household's own, is the thing that ended the argument. Not a leak, not a quote, not an insider whispering to a reporter, a piece of internal paper with every shared room crossed out. It sat under the same lamp as the warm one the whole time, and when it was finally set beside its twin, the difference between them was the whole verdict. One list imagined a home, the other authorized a room. I want to be fair here, because the generous reading deserves its full weight, and it is stronger than the headline villains allow. A limited meeting can be a sincere first step. A father and a son sitting in one neutral room, even with an escort at the door and a red stripe on the card, is not nothing. It is more than they had before. People who have been estranged for years do not repair everything in a single afternoon, and it is entirely possible that this small, bounded, carefully stamped meeting was the honest beginning of something real, and that the household boundary was not cruelty, but caution, a way of protecting a fragile thing from being crushed under a story far too big for it. That reading is true. I hold it. And it still does not rescue the sentence, because the sentence did not promise a first step. It promised a house. So bring it back to the card, because the card is where we started and the card is where this has to end. After the sentence was withdrawn, after the coordinator lost the list, after the biographer's line had done its work, the arrival card was still sitting on that desk. Unchanged, the red stripe still ran across the top. No household access. It had been true before the warm line went out. It had stayed true while the healing story spread, and it was true after the healing story was pulled back. The whole storm passed over it, and it never moved a millimeter, because a stripe is not a feeling. It is a decision, and the decision had already been made. That is the quiet image I am left with. A guest list with every shared room crossed out, lying beside an arrival card that let a son into exactly one room of his father's world. A meeting that was real, a homecoming that was not. And somewhere across the city, in a communications office, a woman who used to be on a distribution list, refreshing a front page like the rest of us, reading a sentence she is no longer allowed to write. Here is what I keep coming back to. Reconciliation is not the same as a restored household, and the difference between them is not a matter of tone. It is a matter of rooms. You can want your son back with your whole heart and still be part of a family that will only clear one door. Both of those were true at the same time, and the entire fight was about which one the public would be allowed to hear first. And that, in the end, is the small, uncomfortable thing this story leaves on the desk. Not a scandal, not a betrayal in the way the headlines like to sell one. Just a distance measured in rooms between what a father felt and what a household would sign. The warm sentence tried to close that distance with a word. The card kept it open with a stripe. You are allowed to find both of those women sympathetic and still notice which one was telling you.